My good friend Ryuichi Hasegawa has really taken a shining to the grim dark future of the 41st millennium, so this was another book exchange. I got to read a collection of Space Marine short stories, and he got to read probably my favourite 40k novel, Shadowpoint. Happy days are here again. A collection of 10 short stories featuring everyone's favourite warriors of the 41st millennium, the Space Marines. Although there is something of a twist here, in that half the stories centre around Imperial Space Marines, whilst the other half centre around Space Marines of the Traitor Legions. Third person throughout, although being written by 10 different people, there isn't exactly an overall style to it. Just as a point of interest though, out of the 10 I've only ever read full novels by Graham McNeill and Gav Thorpe. Not really being into short story anthologies, I was rather interested at how this would pan out. The only problem I can really find with this as a whole is that for several of the stories I'd finish them and go, God damn it, that should have been a novel! So, no bad thing really. This being a collection of 10 short stories, here are 10 short reviews. An Iron Warrior story, this is a pretty good read, but it does suffer from a couple of problems. The first is that it could have been a bit longer, and annoyingly it isn't, which results in a slightly uneven pace. The second is that if you haven't read the Ultramarines novels, then a lot of the setup will likely be lost on you. However, what the story does potentially set up is a doozy. An Imperial Fists story featuring a death race between bike-mounted Space Marine scouts and Orky speed freaks. The idea behind this is a very good one, but there's just no feeling of speed, and the flow is broken up by lengthy musings from the Book of Rhetoricus. Frankly, in this sort of story, you don't want to be taken out of the action for a review of Imperial Fist battle doctrine. It does have a pretty good ending though, which does save it from complete oblivion. An Avenging Son story featuring a company of Space Marines coping with a seemingly hopeless situation. One of the best in the anthology, it's let down slightly by the ending, which was obviously written to avoid sounding too much like the Soul Drinkers. There are some interesting characters and character interactions, and I think there's a novel in here somewhere, which would be no bad thing, and certainly something that I'd read. A Black Legion story featuring a squad of the traitors on a hunt for some hapless Imperial officer. This is probably my favourite of the anthology, as it achieves in 24 pages the incredible feat of doing something quite unexpected with the traitor marine. It's certainly nice to see another side of the traitor legions that isn't Abaddon the Despoiler throwing a hissy fit as his 209th Black Crusade grinds to a halt. Whilst the story itself may not warrant a revisiting in a novel, the theme explored certainly does, and it could make for a very interesting slice of grim dark sci-fi. A Salamander story acting as a prequel to the Salamander series. The pacing is near perfect. There are some truly excellent Aliens-esque scenes that Kime takes the time to do properly without falling into the trap that some short stories do, which is to rush the ending as the word limit approaches. Excellently, it also tells us everything we need to know about the Salamanders without resorting to lengthy and completely mood-breaking exposition. As a taster for things to come, it's made me very, very interested indeed. A Sons of Malice story, this definitely feels like the setup for a novel or something similar. Not that this is a bad thing, because the setup has a lot of epic potential. Aside from that, this is a very well written story that is decently paced. One huge plus point is that despite there being a number of obvious twists in the tale, these twists are themselves twisted ever so slightly, which stops any potential eye-rolling dead in its power-armoured tracks. A Deathwatch story focusing on a 5-man kill team as they infiltrate an Orky ship. It's interesting to see another facet to Space Marine combat that's more akin to an SAS op than the high-impact shock troopers we're used to seeing them be. The characters are nicely defined, and it is fun to see the occasional spark as differing chapter doctrines collide. The only significant problem I could find was the kill team are introduced to us in a fairly ham-fisted manner, giving us their real names, their full names, their chapter, and their Deathwatch nicknames in about 2 paragraphs, initially making things a little confusing. As with the Labyrinth, the ending feels like a setup for something bigger, and a few more Deathwatch stories would be no bad thing. A Black Templar story following a group of sword brethren as they attempt to infiltrate a chaos-held fortress. This is a well-written, nicely self-contained story that gives a good insight into some of the brutal decisions made every day to ensure the Imperium survives until the next. There are many fine moments, some of which I found genuinely awe-inspiring, which is no mean feat given that I've read 16 Space Marine novels to date. The ending, though, is brilliant. I take no shame in admitting that a manly tear formed as I read the last few lines, and I hope that someone at the Black Library lets Darren Cox write a Black Templars novel. It could be stunning. A Night Lord story which, like several others in this anthology, feels like the setup for something bigger. What I like most about this one is that we get an insight into what happens to Imperial worlds when the Imperium doesn't care about it anymore. It's also nice to have a look at the recruitment practices of the traitor legions. Although there is one scene that reminds me of a certain sequence in Hot Shots, this is a decent story with some good, well-written moments. A Crimson Fist story that is, quite literally, okay. The idea behind it is a very good one and there are some damn fine moments, the ending being a particular highlight, but there are some stylistic choices that really annoy me. Namely, when a good-sized battle kicks off, after the first few engagements, the text starts sounding like an extract from a history book detailing the end of the battle and the result of the war. It just feels a little cheap. Broadly, though, the good bits do outweigh the bad bits, and there is something very satisfying about seeing an Astartes nearly overcome with rage. Overall, this is a very good read, and in my view, Honour Among Fiends and They Shall Know No Fear and Fires of War justify purchasing this book.